She stood alone, voice shaking but steady. The gallery snickered, the attorneys smirked. Her story was just too unbelievable. Until the side door opened, and in walked a man in full uniform. A colonel no one had seen in years. He saluted her first, then turned to the court and said, "She saved my entire unit. Every single one. From which city in the world are you watching this video today? If you enjoy stories that blend military honor with unexpected heroism, consider subscribing for more content that explores the extraordinary courage found in the most unlikely places." The morning fog had not yet lifted from the San Francisco Bay when Dr. Elena Rodriguez parked her 15-year-old Honda Civic in the employee lot of the Veterans Affairs Medical Center. At 6:45 a.m., the hospital corridors were still quiet, filled only with the soft footsteps of night shift nurses completing their final rounds and the distant hum of medical equipment that never slept. Elena moved through these hallways with the quiet efficiency of someone who had walked them for 12 years, her worn sneakers making barely a sound on the polished linoleum. At 34, Elena carried herself with the careful posture of someone who had learned to make herself invisible. Her dark hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail, and her white coat bore the simple embroidered name, E. Rodriguez, M.D. Psychiatry, with none of the additional credentials or departmental affiliations that mark the careers of more prominent physicians. She paused at the nurse's station to collect patient files, exchanging quiet morning greetings with the staff who had become her closest colleagues over the years. Dr. Rodriguez, called Nurse Patricia Williams, a 20-year veteran of the VA system whose maternal instincts extended to both patients and younger doctors. "You have that deposition today, don't you?" Elena's hands tightened imperceptibly around the patient files. "This afternoon at 2 p.m., Federal Courthouse downtown. You going to be okay?" Patricia's concern was genuine. The entire medical staff had heard about the lawsuit, the allegations, and the impossible position Elena found herself in. "I'll be fine," Elena replied, though her voice carried none of the confidence her words suggested. "It's just telling the truth." How hard can that be? What Elena didn't say, what she couldn't say, was that telling the truth in this case meant describing events so extraordinary that she barely believed them herself, even though she had lived through every impossible moment. 3 hours later, in a glass-walled conference room 40 stories above the San Francisco financial district, senior partner Harrison Mitchell was reviewing case files with the focused intensity of a surgeon examining X-rays. At 52, Mitchell had built his reputation defending Fortune 500 companies against what he privately called nuisance litigation, and his success rate in discrediting expert witnesses was legendary among corporate defense attorneys. "The Rodriguez deposition is our key opportunity," Mitchell said to his associate, Jessica Chun, a brilliant 28-year-old Harvard graduate who specialized in medical malpractice defense. "If we can undermine her credibility, the entire plaintiff's case collapses." Chun reviewed her notes, her tablet displaying Elena's professional background. Her credentials are actually quite solid. Harvard Medical School, psychiatry residency at Johns Hopkins, board certified, 12 years at the VA with excellent performance reviews. Mitchell waved dismissively. Credentials don't matter if her testimony sounds like science fiction. Veterans claiming they were saved by a civilian doctor who allegedly performed impossible medical procedures under combat conditions? The jury will think she's delusional or lying. What if she's telling the truth? Chen asked quietly. Mitchell's expression hardened. "There is no truth here, Jessica. There are facts that can be proven in court and stories that cannot. Our job is to focus the jury on what can be proven and discredit everything else." The case had originated 18 months earlier when 7 Army veterans filed a medical malpractice lawsuit against Meridian Pharmaceuticals, claiming that experimental PTSD medications had caused severe neurological damage. The veterans alleged that only the intervention of a VA psychiatrist had prevented permanent disability or death, but their descriptions of that intervention defied medical explanation. According to the veterans' testimony, Dr. Elena Rodriguez had somehow appeared at a remote military outpost in Afghanistan 3 years earlier and performed medical procedures that had saved their lives. The problem was that Elena Rodriguez had never been deployed overseas, had no military training, and had been working her regular shift at the San Francisco VA on the exact dates the veterans claimed she was in Afghanistan. Meridian's legal team saw this as a gift. If they could prove that the veteran savior was a figment of their imagination, a shared delusion brought on by their experimental medication, then the entire foundation of the malpractice case would crumble. Elena spent her lunch break in the hospital chapel, a small non-denominational space that served staff and families seeking quiet reflection. She wasn't particularly religious, but the silence helped her organize her thoughts before facing what she knew would be a hostile interrogation. The truth was more complex than either the plaintiff's attorneys or the defense team understood. Elena had indeed been at the VA hospital on the dates in question. There were security cameras, time clocks, and dozens of witnesses to prove it. But she had also been in Afghanistan, treating 7 soldiers whose minds had been shattered by an experimental drug that was supposed to help them process trauma. The experience had lasted subjectively for days, but had occurred in the space between heartbeats, in a realm where consciousness could transcend physical space when the human mind was pushed beyond its normal limits. She had used techniques that weren't taught in medical school, drawing on something deeper than conventional psychiatry to rebuild minds that had been torn apart at the cellular level. She knew how it sounded. She knew that no medical journal would publish her account, that no professional conference would give her a platform to describe what had happened. But she also knew that 7 men were alive and functional because of those impossible days, and that they deserved someone to tell their story, even if it destroyed her career in the process. At 1:30 p.m., Elena arrived at the federal courthouse, an imposing granite structure that projected the weight of legal authority. She made her way through security and up to the 5th floor, where the law offices of Richardson, Santos and Associates occupied half the building. The plaintiff's attorney, Michael Richardson, met her at the elevator with an expression of poorly concealed concern. "Dr. Rodriguez, thank you for coming. I want to remind you that you're here as a witness for our clients. But the defense is going to try to make you look like either a liar or someone suffering from delusions." Elena nodded, adjusting the strap of her simple black purse. "I understand, Mr. Richardson. I'm just going to tell the truth." "About that," Richardson said carefully as they walked toward the conference room. "I've reviewed your statement multiple times, and I have to ask, are you absolutely certain about the details you've provided? Because once you're under oath, there's no taking it back." Elena stopped walking and looked at him directly. "Mr. Richardson, 7 of your clients are able to function, hold jobs, and maintain relationships because of what happened. Do you want me to lie about that?" Richardson's expression softened. "No, doctor. I want you to tell the truth. I'm just worried about what that truth might cost you." The deposition room was designed to intimidate. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a commanding view of San Francisco Bay, while the massive conference table could seat 20 people, but today held only the essential players. Harrison Mitchell sat at the head of the table like a general surveying a battlefield, flanked by Jessica Chun and 2 junior associates whose primary job was to take notes and look imposing. Elena took her seat across from Mitchell, with Richardson beside her and a court reporter positioned to capture every word. The video camera in the corner added another layer of scrutiny, preserving not just her words, but every facial expression and gesture for future analysis. "Dr. Rodriguez," Mitchell began after the preliminary formalities, his voice carrying the polished authority of someone accustomed to controlling conversations. "You hold yourself out as a medical expert, correct? I'm a licensed psychiatrist with 12 years of experience treating veterans with PTSD and related conditions. And your expertise is limited to conventional medical practice. Is that correct?" Elena hesitated, understanding that this was the first trap. "I practice evidence-based medicine within accepted professional standards." Mitchell smiled, the expression of a hunter who had spotted his prey. "So you would agree that medical procedures must be performed in person, with proper equipment, in appropriate medical facilities?" "Generally speaking, yes. There are no circumstances under which a psychiatrist in San Francisco could provide medical treatment to soldiers in Afghanistan without physically traveling there." The room fell silent except for the soft clicking of the court reporter's machine. Elena looked at Richardson, who gave her an encouraging nod, then back at Mitchell. "In conventional medical practice, no, but the human mind operates according to principles that aren't fully understood by conventional medicine." Mitchell's smile widened. "Dr. Rodriguez, are you claiming that you can project your consciousness across thousands of miles to treat patients?" I'm claiming that consciousness can transcend physical limitations under extreme circumstances, particularly when dealing with severe psychological trauma that affects the basic structure of human awareness. Jessica Chen looked up from her notes, exchanging a glance with Mitchell that clearly said, "We've got her." "Dr. Rodriguez," Mitchell continued, his voice taking on a patronizing tone, "do you have any scientific evidence to support this extraordinary claim? I have 7 living witnesses who can describe in detail the treatment they received. 7 witnesses who were under the influence of experimental psychotropic medications that are known to cause hallucinations and false memories." Elena felt the ground shifting beneath her, but she pressed forward. The consistency of their accounts, the specific medical knowledge they demonstrate, and their subsequent recovery all support the reality of what occurred. Mitchell leaned back in his chair, clearly enjoying himself. "Dr. Rodriguez, isn't it true that shared delusions are a well-documented phenomenon in psychiatric literature? Shared delusions don't typically result in medically verifiable recovery from neurological damage. But recovery could be explained by conventional treatment they received from military medical personnel, couldn't it?" Elena's voice grew quieter but more determined. The military medical records show that conventional treatment had failed. The soldiers were considered lost causes, beyond help. Their recovery began only after the intervention I've described. Mitchell stood and began pacing, a theatrical gesture designed to emphasize his control of the proceedings. "Dr. Rodriguez, let me ask you directly. Do you expect this court to believe that you somehow transported your consciousness to Afghanistan, performed impossible medical procedures using techniques that don't exist in any medical textbook, and saved 7 soldiers who were dying from experimental drug reactions?" Elena met his gaze steadily. "I expect this court to consider the evidence. 7 men who were written off as hopeless cases are now leading productive lives. Something happened to make that possible, and I'm the only medical professional who can explain what that something was." The gallery behind the main participants included several observers, insurance company representatives, junior attorneys, and a few individuals whose connection to the case wasn't immediately apparent. Among them sat a woman in her 60s whose bearing suggested military background, though she wore civilian clothes. She had been taking notes throughout Elena's testimony, her expression growing more thoughtful as the interrogation continued. Mitchell returned to his seat, preparing for what he clearly intended to be his coup de grace. "Dr. Rodriguez, have you ever been treated for psychiatric conditions yourself?" Richardson objected immediately. "Relevance goes to the witness's credibility and mental state," Mitchell replied smoothly. "I'll allow it," the arbitrator ruled, "but keep it focused." Elena's hands tightened in her lap. "I've received counseling for work-related stress, which is common among medical professionals dealing with trauma patients. And during this counseling, did you discuss your belief that you can project your consciousness across geographical distances? That's not an accurate characterization of what I've reported. But you did discuss these experiences with a mental health professional?" Elena realized she was being painted into a corner. Any admission of discussing her experiences in therapy would be twisted to suggest she had been treated for delusions. Any denial would be contradicted by medical records that Mitchell had probably already obtained. "I discussed the difficulty of explaining medically significant events that don't fit conventional paradigms." Mitchell's expression showed he was ready for the killing blow. "Dr. Rodriguez, isn't it true that you've been diagnosed with stress-induced psychotic episodes?" The room erupted. Richardson was on his feet objecting. The court reporter was struggling to keep up with overlapping voices, and Elena felt the world spinning around her. She had been so careful about her medical privacy, but somehow Mitchell had obtained records from a dark period 2 years earlier, when the weight of treating severely traumatized veterans had temporarily overwhelmed her psychological defenses. That diagnosis was incorrect and was reversed after proper evaluation, Elena said quietly, but her voice was lost in the chaos. When order was restored, Mitchell pressed his advantage. "Dr. Rodriguez, given your history of psychiatric treatment and your claims about impossible medical procedures, why should anyone believe your testimony?" Elena sat in silence for a long moment, feeling the weight of professional ruin settling around her. Then she lifted her head and spoke with a clarity that cut through the hostile atmosphere. "Because 7 men who were dying are now alive. because families that were destroyed have been reunited, because soldiers who couldn't function are now working, loving, and contributing to their communities. Something made that possible, and if discrediting me is more important than understanding how those men were saved, then we've lost sight of what medicine is supposed to accomplish. Mitchell nodded with satisfaction. Thank you, Dr. Rodriguez. I have no further questions. As Elena gathered her purse and prepared to leave, the woman from the gallery stood and spoke clearly. I have questions for Dr. Rodriguez, if the court will permit. Mitchell looked annoyed. Who are you, and what's your interest in this proceeding? Colonel Margaret Thorne, United States Army Medical Corps, retired. I'm here as a witness for the plaintiffs. Richardson looked confused. Colonel Thorne, your name isn't on our witness list. That's because until this moment, I wasn't sure Dr. Rodriguez would tell the truth about what happened. Now I know she will. Colonel Thorne approached the witness table with the bearing of someone accustomed to command. At 62, she carried herself with military precision despite being dressed in civilian clothes. Her silver hair was cut in a practical style, and her penetrating blue eyes reflected decades of military service in the most challenging circumstances. Dr. Rodriguez, Colonel Thorne said, her voice carrying parade ground authority, I want you to describe for this court exactly what you saw when you first encountered Sergeant Martinez's unit. Elena looked at Richardson, who nodded encouragingly, then back at Colonel Thorne. They were in a state of complete neurological collapse. The experimental medication had essentially dissolved the barriers between conscious and unconscious mind, leaving them trapped in a continuous loop of traumatic memories. Their brain activity was chaotic, their vital signs were unstable, and conventional medical intervention had no effect. And what did you do? Elena took a deep breath. I entered their shared psychological space and began rebuilding the damaged neural pathways from the inside. It required techniques that aren't taught in medical school, essentially using consciousness itself as a therapeutic tool. Mitchell laughed audibly. Your Honor, this is exactly the kind of delusional testimony we've been discussing. Colonel Thorne turned to face Mitchell, and her expression would have silenced a room full of generals. Mr. Mitchell, I was the commanding officer of the medical unit that had declared those 7 soldiers beyond help. I was present when Dr. Rodriguez appeared at our forward operating base, and I witnessed every moment of what she accomplished. The room fell completely silent. Mitchell's confident expression began to crack. That's impossible. Dr. Rodriguez was never deployed to Afghanistan. She was working at the VA hospital in San Francisco. She was in both places simultaneously. Colonel Thorne replied matter-of-factly, which is exactly why her testimony is so significant. Richardson found his voice. Colonel Thorne, are you saying you can corroborate Dr. Rodriguez's account? I'm saying I commanded the military medical team that tried and failed to save those soldiers using every conventional treatment available. I'm saying that Dr. Rodriguez appeared in our facility without any record of deployment or travel, performed procedures that shouldn't have been possible, and saved 7 men who were clinically brain-dead. Colonel Thorne moved to the front of the room, addressing her remarks to the arbitrator and the video camera. For 28 years, I served as a military physician in combat zones around the world. I've seen every kind of trauma, every form of treatment, every possible medical intervention. What Dr. Rodriguez accomplished went beyond medicine as we understand it, but the results were medically verifiable and absolutely real. She turned back to Elena. Dr. Rodriguez, please tell this court what you told me after you finished treating Sergeant Martinez's unit. Elena's voice was stronger now, supported by the presence of someone who had witnessed the impossible alongside her. I told you that consciousness is more powerful and more flexible than medical science realizes. That in extreme circumstances, when lives are at stake, the human mind can transcend its normal limitations to provide healing that wouldn't otherwise be possible. And what did I tell you? You said that medicine is supposed to serve healing, not the other way around. That if I had found a way to save lives, the medical establishment's inability to explain it was irrelevant. Colonel Thorne nodded, then addressed the room with the authority of someone who had commanded respect in life-and-death situations for nearly 3 decades. Ladies and gentlemen, I've spent my career in military medicine, where the impossible becomes routine when lives are on the line. Dr. Rodriguez didn't violate medical ethics. She expanded the boundaries of what medical ethics should encompass. Mitchell was frantically shuffling through papers, clearly searching for some way to challenge this unexpected testimony. Colonel Thorne, if Dr. Rodriguez was truly at your base in Afghanistan, there would be records, documentation, evidence of her presence. Colonel Thorne smiled grimly. Mr. Mitchell, there are many things that happen in war zones that don't make it into official records. But I can provide you with the testimony of 14 medical personnel who witnessed Dr. Rodriguez's intervention, satellite communications logs that recorded my reports to command about an unprecedented medical breakthrough, and most importantly, the medical records of 7 soldiers who recovered from conditions that military medicine had declared untreatable. She reached into her briefcase and placed a thick folder on the conference table. These are the complete military medical files for Sergeant Martinez's unit, including brain scans, psychological evaluations, and recovery documentation that spans 3 years. Every piece of evidence supports Dr. Rodriguez's account. Elena felt tears forming in her eyes, not from sadness, but from the overwhelming relief of having someone with unquestioned credibility, corroborate the most extraordinary experience of her life. Jessica Chun leaned over to whisper something to Mitchell, who looked increasingly uncomfortable. The confident predator who had entered the room ready to destroy Elena's credibility was now facing a decorated military officer whose testimony could not be dismissed as delusion or fabrication. Colonel Thorne, Mitchell said carefully, are you asking this court to believe that Dr. Rodriguez somehow projected herself across thousands of miles to treat soldiers in Afghanistan? I'm not asking anyone to believe anything, Mr. Mitchell. I'm stating facts as I observe them. Dr. Rodriguez appeared at our medical facility when she was needed, performed procedures that saved 7 lives, and then vanished as mysteriously as she had arrived. The mechanism doesn't matter. The results do. Richardson seized the opportunity. Colonel Thorne, in your professional opinion, did Dr. Rodriguez's intervention save the lives of those 7 soldiers? Without question. They were dying, and she saved them. Every single one. The deposition continued for another hour, with Colonel Thorne methodically dismantling every argument Mitchell had prepared. She presented documentation, medical evidence, and professional testimony that transformed Elena from a delusional doctor into a pioneering healer who had somehow transcended the normal limitations of medical practice. When the session finally concluded, Mitchell's carefully constructed case lay in ruins. Instead of discrediting the key witness, he had inadvertently provided a platform for one of the military's most respected medical officers to validate the most extraordinary medical testimony in legal history. As the participants gathered their materials and prepared to leave, Colonel Thorne approached Elena privately. Dr. Rodriguez, I want you to know that what you did for those soldiers, and what you've done today by telling the truth, represents the highest ideals of medical service. Elena wiped away tears that had been building throughout the afternoon. Colonel, how did you know to be here today? Sergeant Martinez contacted me 6 months ago. He said that the doctor who saved his life was being attacked for telling the truth about what happened. He asked me to help protect you the way you had protected him. But your career, your reputation, supporting my testimony could damage your standing in the military medical community. Colonel Thorne smiled, and for the first time that day, her expression was gentle rather than commanding. Dr. Rodriguez, I'm 62 years old, and I've seen enough war to know that some things are more important than professional reputation. 7 families have their sons, husbands, and fathers back because of what you accomplished. That's worth more than any career. 3 months later, Meridian Pharmaceuticals settled the lawsuit for an undisclosed amount that legal observers estimated in the 8-figure range. The company also agreed to fund research into what the settlement documents carefully termed non-conventional therapeutic approaches for trauma-related neurological damage. Elena received offers from 3 major medical schools to develop research programs exploring the relationship between consciousness and healing. She accepted a position at UCSF, where she now directs the Institute for Consciousness-Based Medicine, the first academic program dedicated to studying medical interventions that transcend conventional therapeutic modalities. Colonel Thorne joined the Institute as a senior fellow, bringing her military medical experience to bear on developing protocols for training physicians in what they diplomatically call expanded therapeutic awareness. Together, They have trained over 200 medical professionals in techniques that push the boundaries of conventional medicine while maintaining rigorous scientific standards. The 7 soldiers who inspired the original lawsuit have become advocates for veterans' rights and innovative medical treatment. Sergeant Martinez completed law school and now represents veterans in medical malpractice cases. 3 others have become medical professionals themselves, driven by their experience to help other veterans who suffer from invisible wounds. Dr. Elena Rodriguez still works regular shifts at the VA hospital, treating veterans with PTSD and related conditions. But her practice now incorporates techniques that she once thought were impossible, helping patients access healing resources that exist beyond the boundaries of conventional medicine. On the first anniversary of her deposition, Elena received a letter from Harrison Mitchell. It read, in part, "Dr. Rodriguez, I spent 30 years believing that truth was whatever could be proven in court. Your testimony, and Colonel Thorne's support, taught me that some truths are too important to be constrained by legal procedure. I hope you continue to expand the boundaries of what healing can accomplish." Elena framed the letter and hung it in her office next to a photograph from the Institute's first graduation ceremony, where 30 physicians received certificates in consciousness-based medical intervention. In the photo, Colonel Thorne stands at attention while Elena addresses the graduates, speaking about the responsibility that comes with expanding the boundaries of medical practice. The most meaningful recognition, however, came from an unexpected source. The American Psychiatric Association, initially skeptical of Elena's work, eventually established the Rodriguez Fellowship for Innovation in Trauma Treatment. The fellowship supports research into therapeutic approaches that challenge conventional assumptions about the limitations of medical intervention. In her acceptance speech for the fellowship's first annual award, Elena reflected on the journey from that hostile deposition room to academic recognition of her work. Medicine advances not by staying within safe boundaries, but by having the courage to explore territory that maps as impossible on our current understanding. The greatest breakthroughs come when we're willing to follow healing wherever it leads, even when it takes us beyond the comfortable limits of what we thought we knew. Today, Elena continues her work at the intersection of consciousness and healing, supported by rigorous research, military validation, and the knowledge that sometimes the most important medical breakthroughs come not from laboratories or textbooks, but from the willingness to transcend conventional limitations when lives are at stake. The techniques she pioneered in that impossible deployment to Afghanistan are now taught in medical schools, practiced in VA hospitals, and researched in academic institutions. What began as an experience so extraordinary that it nearly destroyed her career has become the foundation for a new understanding of healing that honors both scientific rigor and the unlimited potential of human consciousness to serve life.